Hey everybody, it's Brian from Charge Cycle Works, and we're here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, particularly suspension on the Stark Varg. So as you all know, we've been riding and racing the Stark Varg. This one happens to have about 15 hours of time on it. We've raced Gypsy 500. We've raced multiple GP races. We've done a lot of racing on this bike. So when I ordered my Stark Varg, the only information that I gave them for them to set the suspension up was my weight, 190 pounds. And so the way that my bike came for me with that information was the front end was sprung at a 5.0 spring rate, which for me is too much. And in the rear, it was sprung just right for my weight. So what they've done there is they've set the rear for my weight, and so it's appropriate, but the front end was set for a pro-level motocross racer. And even though I'm a pretty decent fast racer, I ride more than just the motocross track. We've been doing all these GP races, so it's too stiff. The springs are too stiff up there, and that's what we're going to fix today. We're going to swap out the springs and go from a 5.0 down to a 4.6. And the way that I figured that out is I went to Racetech's website and I put in all of my information, my weight, my riding style, even my age, and it told me exactly what spring rate to purchase to put into this Varg today. If you want to know exactly how Stark set up your bike based on the information that you gave them, we have an amazing blog about that with all kinds of information that we gathered from multiple forums and even talking to Stark directly. So check out the description below and we'll have a link for you to check out that blog. All right, so there's a lot of videos out there about how to do spring swaps and fluid changes in KYB suspension, and you're more than welcome to go search YouTube for that. The way that we're going to do it today is a way that you can do it in your garage with normal tools. We'll be using a few specialized tools to make the job easier and not damage anything, and we'll list those tools in the description below for you if you choose to buy them. But we're going to do this in a way that you can do in your garage. It would be helpful to have a pair of soft jaws to hold the fork for you, but I've seen people do it without that as well. All right, so let's go over some of the tools that you're going to need. So obviously we're going to need a wrench to disassemble the clamps and get the forks out of the tubes, as well as the brakes and some of the other pieces that you had to disassemble. You need a 17mm socket to release the nut on the bottom of the forks. You're going to need a screwdriver for two things. One, to back your clickers all the way out, and then when we're done, we'll put them back in. And then also to pull your seals if you want to do your seals. Speaking of seals, I've got some brand new SKF low friction seals. These are amazing, and they do have less friction than the seals that came in your forks. Now, this bike is not leaking, but we're going to swap these anyway so that you can see the process. One of the special tools we'll be using today is a wrench to release the top cap. You don't have to use this special tool, but it does make sure that we're not going to damage anything. And another special tool that we have, and you can use a crescent wrench for this, but this is made out of a material that helps not damage things once again, is when we pull the bottom piece of the fork out, you need to slide the damper tube in here to hold it so that you can get a wrench on it. So that's what this is going to be used for. You'll also need a 15mm wrench. And then of course we need some fluids. So you need basically one bottle of fork fluid per fork leg. This is 5 weight. That's what almost everybody uses in a motocross fork. And we need cleaner. So this is suspension clean from Maxima, and we're gonna clean this fork really well on the inside, get all the internals clean before we reassemble it. Very important step. You don't wanna do this without this cleaner. One thing you'll notice that's different about our Vargs is one of the first things that we did when we got our Varg is we put on these Motion Pro quick adjusters, because If you already have one of these bikes, you know that the clickers are almost completely inaccessible with a screwdriver without damaging them. So these are really cool. You can adjust them while they're on the bike under the handlebars with your fingers, which is awesome. And it's also got an air release, so you can release the air pressure, and some air just came out just now. So #1 upgrade on the Stark Varg, in our opinion, is this super handy little quick adjuster from Motion Pro. We'll put it in the link below. So one thing you want to do before you disassemble your fork is you need to back the clickers all the way out. And before you do that, you might want to record what these are set at. So to do that, you're going to put them in first all the way till they stop, and you're going to count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So these were set at 13 out. So you'll want to record that if you want to go back to your stock settings. However, since we're changing out the springs on this, that does affect the valving and the performance of the fork. So I'm actually not going to record my settings, because I'm going to go put them right back in the middle where they came from the factory and then adjust them from there. You'll want to do the same thing on the bottom. If you look in here, there's your rebound adjuster is on the bottom, and same thing. You'll count clockwise how many clicks until it bottoms out, and then we're going to reverse and go all the way out on both sides before we disassemble the fork. I need a special screwdriver just for this. It's like just a little bit too wide for all of our screwdrivers. You have to grab it just right. I've got my safety glasses on because it's no fun to get shot in the eye with cleaning products. So I want to do some basic cleaning before I disassemble this fork. It just minimizes the risk of contaminants entering the internals of the fork. So specifically the places I'm going to clean is around the fork seals here, the stanchion tubes, inside of the crevice here at the bottom. Dirt is often in there. And then also the top cap of the fork, just to make sure there's no dirt in here. So let's do that real quick. And then I'm gonna spray off the uppers as well, just to get any loose dirt that might be on there. Now at the bottom of your fork is where dirt most often collects. We'll just spray that out as best as we can. We'll do more cleaning along the way. All right. So from here, I need to put it in a clamp because this top cap is going to be a little bit difficult to get off. If you don't have a pair of soft jaws or a clamp like this, you can do this while it's on the bike in your triple clamp. Before you take it off your bike, leave it in the triple and use this as your clamp. And on the Varg, if you are using a special tool like this, there's not enough room in here between the handlebar mount, I noticed. So I actually could not use this tool while it was on the bike. So I've got it in the clamp now. When you clamp it, make sure you clamp it in the same areas that it would clamp on your bike, because they are reinforced more in those areas and you don't want to damage your fork. So these are on here a little bit tight, so you might want to give it a good knock with your palm or a soft mallet. This one wasn't too bad. All right, now if I picked up on the bottom, you'll see that I can lift this up. It's fully loose now. Next thing, we'll take it out of the clamp again, and we're going to drain the oil in it. Yeah, it doesn't look too dirty, but I can see some contaminants and some film in there. So a good time to do a fluid change. And if you stroke the fork back and forth, you'll see a little bit more fluid come out as you move it up and down. All right, we don't need to get it all out yet. I'm going to temporarily screw this on just hand tight for now because we're going to do the bottom of the fork now. I'm actually going to do it up to the rubber gasket, or the rubber O-ring, just so that no fluid leaks out. Yeah, I'm going to have to clamp this. Let me readjust this clamp. So now that we've got the top cap off, we've drained the oil, we're going to disassemble the bottom. So these can be a little tight in here, so you might have to give it a bit of force to break it loose. And if you didn't adjust your clickers all the way out, do that before you loosen the bottom. It just helps protect the adjusters in there. All right, it's all the way loose, and now we're going to use this handy little tool. Okay, so I've taken the fork out of the clamps because I have to put a lot of force against this fork, against the spring to get this tool or a crescent wrench inside here to hold it out. So I'm going to push it down, slide that in and not pinch my hand while I'm at it. So now I have access to the nut. So I've got the bottom out, I've got the holder in, and now I'm just going to use these two wrenches to break it loose. And it's not on there that hard, doesn't take a lot of effort. So we'll set this aside. But there's one more piece in here, very important not to forget this. The adjuster rod comes out the bottom as well. So don't forget to remove this piece. And don't forget to put it back in when you're done. I've accidentally left this out before and had to disassemble my entire fork and put it back in. That was a real bummer. All right, so now that the end piece is off, I'm just going to compress the fork again and pull this special holder out. And now the fork is ready to come apart. If you're not changing out your fork seals and you're only going to do a fluid change and your spring, you can simply collapse the fork and pull the inner assembly out. Now, something that's important to know, this is a dual chamber fork. This is the outer chamber, and this is the inner chamber. And all of your valving and a lot of your fluid is actually inside this inner chamber. And you can go longer intervals with the inner chamber versus the outer chamber. So today we're not going to do the inner chamber. We'll do that in another video at a future date. We're just interested in doing springs and a fluid change on the outer chamber. So I'm going to set this aside for now. So you might have noticed something didn't come out, the main thing that we're changing. So I'm just going to flip this upside down a little bit so I can get that spring out, and some fluid's going to come with it. So make sure you've got something below to catch the fluid. So here's the old spring, that should be a 50. And I'm going to put this back in my clamp and just kind of let it gravity chain over my catch basin here. All right, we told you we're going to do seals today, even though these are not leaking. While we have the fork apart, we're right there. We might as well show you guys how to do seals. It's not as hard as you think. So perhaps the hardest part is to be very careful with your screwdriver. This is aluminum, and you want to be very careful not to damage the aluminum. So I'm just going to go in here and very gently just try to get a bit of a gap between the seal and the aluminum stanchion tube. It can be a little bit hard to get it started, but once you get it started, you can see it's coming out easily now, and I'm just going to kind of work my way around from side to side until it's loose, and then it comes right out. So this is actually your dust wiper, and this is not the part that leaks. This just keeps dirt from going inside where your seal is. Your seal is still up inside of the fork here. All right, so the fork is not quite ready to come apart yet. The inner seal and the fork is actually held together by a clip. Be very careful not to scratch. It's just a simple motion to kind of twist that retaining clip out from there. So now that that clip is released, your seal is in here, and one good yank and it'll come apart. This is the best part. You feel like a superhero doing this. So we're just gonna kind of, until it comes apart, just like that. This is another special tool. They're really inexpensive, and I highly recommend buying one of these to do fork seals. If you don't have one of these, one trick we used to do in the old days before these were invented, get a Ziploc baggie out of your mom's kitchen and simply put that over the end of the fork. And what you're doing is you're covering these really sharp edges here that the low friction sliders go into, so that when we install the seals, we don't nick them. Because if you do nick them, you'll have a leaky fork seal, and we're here to put new seals on and not have leaky ones. So I'm applying some Ultra Slick Racetech suspension grease on the seals. If you don't have any of that, just dip your finger in some suspension fluid and use that. Make sure that the spring side is facing down towards the bottom of the fork. So the dust wiper goes on first, and then on the KYBs we have this little piece that sits inside of the wiper. Then we've got your retaining clip. Once again, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the inside of this seal to make sure that it goes on nice and easy. And the kind of open side is going to be up, and the spring side is going to go down towards the bottom of the leg. Before I install these last few pieces, because they were in the fork before and they were exposed to some dirty oil, I am going to clean those. Before I clean them, I'm going to put some gloves on, because this cleaner will eat the oils out of your skin. So let me go get some gloves. All right, now that I have some gloves, I'm just going to clean these real quickly before I slide them back on in the order that they came off. So the plastic retainer or bushing, and then the steel one. And then next was the smaller outer bushing. And then for the final one, I'm going to pull this back off because it actually sits clamped into the fork. Before I take the outer chambers and put them back together, I'm going to spray this outer tube and get it nice and clean as well. So I've got the upper fork leg, and I'm going to insert the lower fork leg into it. Nice and easy. Now, one thing to be aware of is this low friction slider actually sits in here inside the outer leg. And so we have to kind of gently get it down in there. All right, so I've got the bushing down in here where it needs to go. One more tool that you have to do fork seals appropriately and not damage them is you do need a fork slider tool. So these clamp on simply like this. Now this acts like a slide hammer, so I'm going to kind of use it as a slide hammer action. And listen to the sound. You'll hear a difference when it bottoms out and it's fully seated. So the first hit was kind of muted, but then the subsequent hits that I did after that, you could hear a very solid connection from the fork all the way down into the table. That's what you want to listen to. Until you hear that solid connection, it's not down there all of the way. All right, so we've got our seal in there. Very important, we've got to get the retaining clip back in. Without this retaining clip, your fork can actually come apart. This is what holds it together. So I'm just going to kind of work this in here by hand. They can be a little bit tricky to get started. So the retaining pin is in here, but it's only in here part way. So I'm going to take a screwdriver, and we've got to get it down inside, all the way down inside of the retaining clip. So I'm just pushing on it, making sure it's all the way down in here, so you can see this piece is not inside of the groove. So you can see just now I pushed down on it and it went all the way inside of the groove now. So if I was to try to pull this out of here, it's not going to come out. So just go around and visually check all the way around that the spring is inside of the groove. All right, one more step. So we still have our dust slider here, and I'm just going to use my fingers to push that down in there. It's going down. So if you're having a hard time pushing that down with your fingers, just put a little bit of suspension fluid on it, and that should help it go down in there. Try not to use this as a slide hammer. Probably would work, but best to do this with your fingers if you can. So once it's seated all the way against the fork, your fork is back together. All right, so I've got my new spring and my old spring. The old spring's a 5.0, the new spring's a 4.6. And in the box with the Racetech springs is a bunch of preload adjuster washers. And what this is used for is to adjust how much preload is on the spring set. Now I can also see there's a slight height difference between these two springs. So I'm going to put 2 washers on here, and that compensates for the height difference. And I'm going to add a 3rd for a little bit additional preload, because I am going to a slightly lighter spring. And even though Racetech recommended a 4.6 for me, I feel like that might be a tad on the light side. So I'm going to add 1 more washer in here to stiffen it up just a tiny bit. All right, so I've already cleaned my whole assembly with some suspension cleaner. I've got my 3 washers that I decided to use, and here's the brand new spring. Now we can slide this whole assembly inside the tubes. I'm going to use my finger to help guide it through the hole at the bottom. All right, and we're all the way bottomed out on the spring. So once again, I'm going to temporarily screw this back on, and then I'm going to move to the floor. So while you're doing this, just make sure that you're all lined up and you're not binding on anything. And we'll push it down. Do not forget your adjuster rod, very important. So I'm going to spray this out really quick. So we're going to insert the adjuster rod. And this one is not directional. On some suspension it is. I'm screwing this on in finger tight until it's bottomed out. And that's as far as that's going to go with your fingers. And we're going to hold the retaining nut and tighten this. Now you don't want to torque that on super He-Man tight because these are aluminum components and you can strip them. You just want enough resistance with hand tools that it feels nice and tight. All right, before I pull the damper rod retaining tool out and let the spring suck it back into the fork, it is recommended to use Loctite on the threads. So I've already cleaned this with suspension cleaner and it's dry. So now I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite on here, not too much. And then one last thing, I'm going to dab my finger in some suspension fluid, and because I use cleaner on this O-ring, I want to make sure I get some lubricant on this O-ring before it goes inside the metal. It's not good to have dry O-rings. Okay, so we're back on the floor, because once again, this does take quite a bit of effort against the spring. I'm going to pull this out and let it slowly rebound back up until it touches the threads. All right, I got it back in my vise. Once again, use your soft jaws so that you don't damage any aluminum, because this is all aluminum and fairly soft materials. I'm going to grab a torque wrench because we want to do this part properly. Got the torque wrench that came with the Stark Varg. So awesome. They gave us a toolkit, and we are going to 50 Newton meters on the base here, which is what the manual says. There we go, 50 Newton meters. We're almost done. It's time to add fork fluid. So once again, this is 5-weight Maxima fork fluid. And according to Race Tech, when I did my spring calculator, it said I should be using 330 milliliters of fluid in this fork. And just in case you're wondering, 330 milliliters is the same as 330 cc's, which is on the ratio right here. So there's 100. 300, 325. Obviously, it's not easy to do exactly 330, so I'm going between 300 and, what am I at, 325? Yeah. Obviously, it's hard to be exact on this because the markers don't tell you exactly 330, so just eyeball as best as you can. That looks like 330 to me. Now, what's interesting about this oil in the outer chamber is it's purely for lubrication. It's not doing any dampening, although it does affect the last few centimeters of suspension travel. So less oil will make it bottom out softer, and more oil will give it a more resistance to bottom out. So when you hear about people adjusting the oil in their fork tubes, it's only adjusting the last few centimeters of travel. Once again, you can put your clickers back to where you originally had them, but what I'm going to do is set them right in the middle because I've put a new spring in here. It's a different weight, and I'm going to be adjusting my clickers on this new spring rate. So there's 22 total clicks on the compression up top. I'm going to set it to 12. And then let's pull this fork out of here and do the bottom. All right, so the bottom is also 22 clicks, but I'm not going to go in the middle. We've done a lot of research on the KYB SSS forks. They're on Yamahas and Suzukis and lots of bikes. It seems to be that the preferred setting for rebound is 9, so I'm going to set my rebound to 9 clicks. Now, when you're setting this, your clickers, you're going to turn it all the way in clockwise as deep as it goes until it stops, and then I'm going to back it out 9. So it's 9 out. 8, 9. Okay, so we're 9 at the bottom on rebound and 12 on the compression at the top. I have a feeling 12 might be a little soft, but using the Motion Pro clicker adjusters, I can hand adjust this while I'm riding, so that's pretty cool. All right, so that wasn't too bad. We disassembled the fork, we cleaned it, we installed lighter weight springs because it came from the factory with springs that were too stiff for me. We installed new fork seals and fresh fluid, and this is ready to ride again. Except you're gonna have to rewind this video all the way back to the beginning and do this one more time because there are 2 fork legs and the steps are identical for the other side. Internally, these forks are identical to each other. So that's your forks. We'll cover valving in a future video. We've actually already valved the rear shock on my Stark Varg. I have Racetech Gold valves in it. And the reason I did that is the rear end was too stiff, but not because of the spring, the dampening was too stiff. And I'm sure a lot of you riding your Stark Varg have noticed how stiff and harsh the rear end is. It's good. It's great on a motocross track, especially for a really fast rider. But for your more intermediate and slower riders, and especially riders that want to spend time riding off-road, off the motocross track, it's way too harsh. And there's actually a quite easy fix in the valving to fix that. But we'll cover that in a future video. So be sure to subscribe, and we'll get to that in a future video. And thank you for tuning in.